The descent of Flight 242 was not a glide, it was a controlled fall. Captain O'Donnell had opened the outflow valves at the rear of the fuselage to their maximum aperture. At 25,000 feet and dropping like a stone, the pressure differential between the pressurized cabin and the thin atmosphere outside transformed the interior of the Boeing 777 into a high-velocity wind tunnel. The white fog, which had previously drifted with the lazy insolence of cigarette smoke in a jazz club, was now screaming toward the tail. It moved in horizontal streaks, ghost-white lines of cocaine hydrochloride rushing to escape the aluminum tube. For the passengers of economy class, this was not a safety measure. It was the end times. To their chemically ravaged perceptions, the rushing wind sounded like the sucking of a great cosmic drain. The floor was tilted at 18 degrees. Gravity was lofty, no longer pressing them down. But fear is a powerful fuel, especially when mixed with a lethal dose of a Class A stimulant. "They're venting US," screamed Gary the accountant, clambering over the headrest of 12C. "It's a purge." The mob surged forward. It was a terrifying demographic mix, grandmothers in cardigans wielding knitting needles like shanks, teenagers in hoodies streaming live reaction videos, businessmen using their laptops as shields. They were united by a single, paranoid conviction: the pilots were trying to kill them, and the only safety lay in the cockpit. Standing between this tsunami of high-functioning psychosis and the flight deck was the sane squad's makeshift militia. Senator Eleanor Vance stood at the vanguard. He had discarded his shirt entirely now, his pale, spray-tan torso gleaming with sweat and entitlement. He held a Toomey carry-on bag in one hand and a rolled-up Wall Street Journal in the other, wielding the newspaper like a Roman gladius. "Hold the line," Vance bellowed, his voice cracking over the roar of the wind. "The caravan has arrived. Defend the border." Vance didn't see terrified tourists. He saw his stump speech come to life. He saw the spectral hordes he had warned the suburbs about. He wasn't fighting for his life, he was fighting for his legacy. The first wave hit. Gary the accountant threw himself at the barricade of beverage carts. He was foaming at the mouth, screaming about tax brackets and death. Vance met him with the fury of a man down 10 points in the polls. He slammed the Toomey bag into Gary's chest. "Vetoed!" Vance screamed. Gary bounced off the hard-shell luggage and tumbled back into the aisle. But behind Gary came the grandmother from 14C. She was small, white-haired, and currently possessed the strength of a chimpanzee on PCP. She actually leaped, over the beverage cart, her knitting needles aimed at Vance's eyes. "Demon!" she shrieked. Luka Markovich stepped out from behind the senator. He moved with the fluid, bored precision of a man who had broken up bar fights in ports from Odessa to Caracas. He didn't punch the grandmother, Luka had a code, but he did intercept her trajectory. He caught her midair, using the heavy stainless steel coffee pot as a shield to deflect her needles. Clang! Then, he spun her around, grabbed the back of her cardigan, and tossed her gently but firmly onto the pile of first-class blankets designated as the holding cell. "Sit," Luka grunted. "Knit something calm." "I'll knit your shroud," she spat, struggling against the plush duvet. "Tasha!" Luka yelled, ducking a flying iPad. "I need legal counsel on the left flank." Tasha Green was busy. She was standing on the armrest of 3C, shouting over the heads of the mob. She wasn't fighting with fists, she was fighting with psychology. She knew that even in a drug-induced fugue state, the middle-class brain responds to one thing above all else: litigation. "Cease and desist," Tasha shouted, pointing a finger at a man trying to climb over the seats. "By crossing this line, you are consenting to a binding arbitration clause with a zero liability waiver. You are waiving your right to sue. Do you hear me? You are voiding your warranty." The man hesitated. The cocaine pushed him forward, but the deep-seated American fear of fine print pulled him back. He froze, one leg over the seat back, torn between rage and financial caution. "That's right." Tasha pressed, seeing the hesitation. "Go back to your seat or I will depose you for 6 weeks in a windowless room in Delaware." The man whimpered and retreated. But for everyone they turned back, 2 more pushed forward. The pressure in the cabin was equalizing, the air growing thicker as the plane plummeted toward 10,000 feet, but the momentum of the riot was self-sustaining. Sheila, the veteran flight attendant, was manning the center. She had abandoned the coffee pot and was now dual-wielding seltzer bottles. She treated the encroaching passengers like bad cats. PSSSHHT. A jet of carbonated water hit a teenager in the face. He recoiled, high-sizing about acid rain. PSSSHHT. She sprayed a woman trying to bite the senator's leg. "Back!" Sheila barked. "No beverages until the seatbelt sign is off. Sit your ass down, or so help me God I will cancel your miles." Brenda Miller, who had momentarily ceased to be the plane's alternator, had rejoined the fight on the wrong side. She was crawling under the seats, convinced she was a Navy SEAL. She popped up near Vance's leg. "I found the leak." Brenda screamed, grabbing Vance's ankle. "The deep state is in his shoes." "Get off me, woman." Vance kicked wildly. "I have immunity." Behind the line, Marcus and Tyrell were huddled in the galley with Jasmine. They were the rear guard, protecting the only innocent souls on board, the sleeping children in the first few rows of economy. "This is insane," Marcus whispered, watching the white senator fight his own constituents while a black lawyer shouted about arbitration. "This is literally the craziest thing I have ever seen. And I grew up in Florida." "Just keep the beat," Jasmine said. She was bobbing her head, her eyes closed, one hand on the wall of the plane. "We're dropping the base." "Wait for the drop." "The drop is coming." "What drop?" Tyrell asked, clutching his water bottle. "The level off," Jasmine smiled beatifically. "The remix." In the cockpit, the remix was approaching fast. The altimeter unwound like a frantic clock. 15,000, 14,000, 13,000. Captain O'Donnell was wrestling the yoke with both hands. The 777 was a heavy bird, and diving it at maximum velocity near the structural limit, VMO, made the airframe shudder and groan. Passing 12,000, First Officer Ruiz called out, her voice steady despite the sweat dripping down her neck. "Target altitude 10,000. Air quality?" O'Donnell grunted. Ruiz glanced at the rear camera feed. The white fog was thinner. The violent venting had sucked the bulk of the particulate matter out into the Atlantic sky. The air coming in now was clean, thick, oxygen-rich lower atmosphere air. "Visibility improving," Ruiz said. "But the passengers are still hostile." "They're not hostile, they're high," O'Donnell corrected. "Prepare to level off. It's going to be heavy. I have to pull 3 GS to arrest this descent or we kiss the waves." "Cabin secure?" Ruiz asked. O'Donnell laughed. It was a dark, hysterical sound. "Define secure. Sheila is fighting a grandmother with a seltzer bottle. Leveling off in 3, 2, 1. Pulling up." O'Donnell hauled back on the yoke. Physics is the ultimate arbiter of conflict. One moment, the passengers were fighting gravity, leaning forward against the steep angle of the descent. The next moment, gravity changed direction. As the plane pitched up to level off at 10,000 feet, the G-force spiked. Everyone, rioters, defenders, senators, and flight attendants, was suddenly 3 times heavier than they were supposed to be. The effect was instantaneous and slapstick. Vance, who had been winding up for a haymaker punch, crumpled as if his skeleton had turned to lead. He collapsed onto his Toomey bag with a wheeze. Gary the accountant dropped to his knees, pinned to the floor by his own weight. The grandmother, mid-shriek, was pressed into the blankets. Tasha Green, anticipating the move because she listened to the engine pitch, grabbed a seat back and held on. She watched as the mob simply sat down. Forcefully. The roar of the wind vanished as the plane slowed. The outflow valves closed partially to repressurize at the lower altitude. The cabin went relatively quiet, save for the groan of the engines throttling up to maintain level flight. The white fog was gone. In its place was the crisp, clean air of 10,000 feet. It smelled of salt and rain. For a long moment, nobody moved. The floor was covered in bodies, luggage, spilled pasta, and broken plastic. It looked like the aftermath of a Roman orgy held inside a washing machine. Senator Vance was the first to speak. He pushed himself up on one elbow, his chest heaving, his face a mask of confusion and lingering adrenaline. He looked at the pile of economy passengers groaning on the floor. He looked at Tasha. He looked at his own bare chest. Did we win? Vance wheezed. Tasha stepped over a pile of Sky Mall magazines. She looked tired. The cocaine high was still there, a buzzing wire in her brain, but the fresh air was diluting it. The sharp, jagged edge of the paranoia was dulling into a throbbing headache. We held the line, Senator, Tasha said. She reached down and offered him a hand. Vance looked at her hand. Then he looked at Marcus and Tyrell, who were peeking out from the galley. Who are they? Vance whispered, his eyes narrowing, the ghost of the drug still whispering to him. They're the architects, Senator, Tasha lied smoothly. They designed the wall. You hired them. Vance blinked. His brain, desperate for a narrative that made him the hero, latched onto this lie like a life raft. Vance nodded sagely, accepting Tasha's hand. Good men. Strong design. Very structural. He stood up, wobbling. He looked at the carnage in the aisle. My fellow Americans. Vance croaked. Save it, Senator, Sheila's voice cut through the air. She was sitting on the jump seat, looking like a statue of exhaustion. She had an unlit cigarette hanging from her lip. The seatbelt sign is still on. From the floor, Gary the accountant groaned and rolled over. He looked up at Luca, who was standing over him with the coffee pot. Is it over? Gary whispered. Did we crash? No, Luca said gently. We just landed in reality. It's a bit of a rough neighborhood. The intercom clicked. Captain O'Donnell's voice filled the cabin. It was shaky, but trying for professional detachment. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the captain. We have leveled off at 10,000 feet. The air quality issues should be resolving. We are diverting to Lodge's Field in the Azores. Flight time is approximately 20 minutes. There was a pause. A long, heavy hesitation. Please, O'Donnell added, his voice breaking the protocol. Please just sit down. Just everybody sit down and drink some water. The normies began to stir. The pure, psychotic rage was fading, replaced by the crushing, inevitable come-down. Shame began to creep into their faces. Gary looked at his hands, wondering why his knuckles were bruised. The grandmother looked at her knitting needles, horrified to find she had been using them as daggers. Brenda Miller crawled out from under seat 4D. Her hair was a bird's nest. She had lost a shoe. She stood up, shaky, and looked around. She saw Marcus. She saw the wine stain on the carpet where she had swung the bottle. For a second, the paranoia flared again, the instinct to scream, to blame, to attack. But the fresh oxygen was doing its work. The narrative in her head fractured. Brenda stammered. She looked at Tasha. I think I left the oven on. Sit down, Karen, Tasha said softly. The oven is fine. Marcus and Tyrell walked out of the galley. They stepped carefully over the debris. They didn't look angry. They looked exhausted. They looked like two young men who had just survived a safari through the darkest heart of the American psyche. Marcus stopped in front of Vance. The senator stiffened, his muscles bunching. Marcus reached out. Vance flinched. Marcus picked up the senator's tie from the floor. He handed it to him. You dropped your flag, sir, Marcus said. Vance took the tie. He looked at it. He looked at Marcus. For a brief, fleeting moment, the drug-induced veil lifted, and he saw not an invader, not a demographic threat, but a kid in a hoodie handing him a piece of silk. Thank you, Vance mumbled. He looked away, ashamed. Don't get used to it, Sheila called out from her seat. The hangover is coming. And it's going to be a bitch. Jasmine Vega slid down the wall in the galley, finally sitting on the floor. She pulled her headphones back up around her neck. Track change, Jasmine whispered to no one. Tempo down. Ambient mix. The plane flew on, a battered metal tube cruising through the clean, cold night, carrying 300 recovering addicts toward a rock in the middle of the ocean. The war was over, but the cleanup, the legal, moral, and spiritual hangover, was just beginning.